Welcome to Real Estate Investing Abundance, the show for busy, fulfilled professionals like you to learn how to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. Now, here is your host, Dr. Alan Lomax.
Hello, enlightened investors. Welcome back to Real Estate Investing Abundance. I'm your host, Dr. Alan, and what a delight it is to have you with us again. We're always grateful for your presence. Today, you're going to be enlightened in the realm of Airbnb, and we're going to look at the myth that Airbnb is a bust. And we are so happy to have with us an expert in the field. And Tim Hubbard has been in the industry for a good long while, and so he has a lot of insights to share with us. Tim is an international real estate investor with a focus on short-term rentals across 4 countries and more than 10 different cities. His team expertly manages properties virtually, and he has hosted over 30,000 guests. So, Tim, so glad to have you back with us. Tim was with us about 3 years ago when we were broadcasting under our previous label. And we were thrilled to have him then. We're even more excited to have you back with us today, Tim. So, first of all, just tell us where you're at, because you are an international globetrotter. So where are you coming in from today?
Yeah, I get around a little bit, but hey, first of all, thanks for having me back, Alan. It's good to see you again. I can't believe it's been several years already. Time sure flies by, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
I'm currently down in Brazil, and so actually for about the last 3 years, I've been spending about half the year down here in Brazil, and then about the other half in Colombia. But looking back at our last interview together, most of our portfolio is still in the United States. So,
well, that is interesting. So, tell us just a little bit, Tim, about your operations and your business, and really how long have you been doing this? And you're in 10 different cities, 4 different countries. Do I remember that right? I just read that. 4 countries and 10 different cities. So tell us just a little bit about the operations.
Yeah, well, I got started with real estate back in 2010, so pretty good timing after the last crash. I was able to pick up a few properties, and I started down the traditional long-term residential route, and I did that for several years. I worked as a commercial broker. We sold big investment projects, mainly multifamily, but also shopping, industrial. I really learned a lot during that time. And my own personal real estate portfolio had gotten to a pretty good point where I was starting to be able to live a little bit more passively. But I was still investing in long-term rentals at that point. So around 2015, I decided to look for investment options outside of my home state, where I'm originally from, California. And I was sort of traveling around the US looking for long-term rentals, sort of turnkey properties where I could just invest some money and let the management companies take over. And during those trips, I was staying in short-term rentals, and I'd also been staying in short-term rentals for a long time during my travels before that. And I just realized, like, hey, these short-term rentals I'm staying in, I know roughly what the cost of the property is, and I know what I'm paying as a guest, and I know that compared to the long-term rentals that I'm looking at in this same market, these are making way more money. And so it was sort of at that point that I decided to convert some of my existing properties over into short-term rentals. And then I sort of started focusing on short-term rentals and ended up eventually investing outside of California. I invested in multiple states, and then eventually outside of the US. I moved down to Colombia around 2017. And yeah, now we manage properties virtually. So I guess along that journey, Alan, I was learning how to manage my own personal portfolio as best as possible, and virtually, because I was not near all the properties. And so really got that pretty well figured out. And then just recently, actually about a year ago, we started helping other property owners, other short-term rental owners, to manage their properties virtually with our team. So it's been a fun journey.
It sounds like you have a fun life, that is for sure. So So interestingly, you're spending about half your time in Colombia and about half your time in Brazil, two different languages. And you're
Mm.
an English speaking native English speaker. So, three
Mhm.
different languages you're certainly dealing with. How do you deal with all of those language barriers?
I live in a constant state of confusion. No, I actually I had been studying Spanish for quite a long time. I lived in Spain for a little bit. I did a study abroad program there when I was in undergrad, and so I learned quite a bit of Spanish. And then after a few years and living in Colombia, that got better. And then coming down to Brazil, which is Portuguese, that has a lot of the same root structure, and it's a pretty similar language. And so now, after spending a few years here, I'm now comfortable with Portuguese. It also helps that my girlfriend, we've been together several years, doesn't speak English, so it's sort of forced Portuguese
Oh,
practice, but it's been good. It's been good.
yeah. Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty here of operating short-term rentals, and particularly, how are you able to manage your portfolio? And now you're doing third-party property management. How are you doing all of this virtually?
Well, we use a lot of tools. So we use a lot of software programs. And fortunately, over the years, short-term rentals and Airbnb really blew up, right? I mean, it was very trendy, I guess you could say, for a long time, especially after COVID. And along with that, there's been a lot of new tools and options for us. And so that has made things much, much easier than it used to be. We have digital locks, for example, which we've had for a long time. So all of our guests get unique door codes key to get in. It makes the property secure. We have cameras to monitor who's going into our properties. We have property management software, much like we have in the residential space to manage large multifamily. We have that now for short-term rentals, which helps us manage all of our guests and then also manage calendars between different sites where we might be listing our properties. We now have software to dynamically price our short-term rentals, which accounts for so that our prices are changing literally every day based on demand and occupancy in the market, based on day of the week, based on events, much like an airline would do, or traditional hotels. We have digital guidebooks now where we can provide our guests all the information they need to know about our property in a really easy to see format. So we have a lot of technology, and then coupled with that, we have an excellent virtual team. And we're scattered. So yeah, I'm down here in South America, but a lot of our team are in the Philippines. We have a fair amount of people in Eastern Europe now. We have another team member in Mexico. And so we're able to use all the technology and the fact that most short-term rentals, or all short-term rentals for that matter, are operated the same way. Yes, there's different property sizes and there's different things to consider, but the reality is that short-term rentals are operated the same way, and we have so many tools now that we can do this virtually. We don't have to be there in person anymore. With the one caveat that we have someone on the ground to help us, of
Yeah.
course. So we have to have a good housekeeping team, and we have to have someone available for maintenance. So we can combine our virtual part with a couple folks on the ground, and we can manage professionally.
Well, that was the question that was arising in my mind as you were talking about all of the software. Is that, yeah, that's great and wonderful, but you're going to have boots on the ground.
Mhm.
How do you manage that from a distance?
Um, Again, so with some tools, but we have really good communication between our team on the ground and our team virtually. So for our internal communication, not the communication between us and our guests, we use Slack, which is a pretty common program where we can combine multiple people working on the same property into one communication channel. So we can keep things very transparent there. But then on the operational side, we use another program. It's called Breezeway. Is designed specifically for short-term rental operations. That allows us to create custom checklists for our housekeepers based off the property. So we can we can customize as much as we need to. If it's a large home that sleeps 20 people and it has a jacuzzi and it has a large barbecue where we have to always replace the charcoal, we can leave all those instructions in there. We can require photos in those checklists. So it's a really, really good program that helps us kind of streamline all the operations, as well as if there's any sort of issue that arises. So if our housekeeping team shows up to a property and maybe it's just that the guests left their, they left their cell phone behind, or they left something behind. Our checklist is going to ask that as well. We can simply take a picture of it. We can notify the guest right away. And so I guess it comes down to communication, but we have some great tools to assist with making sure the communication's efficient.
Do you have management on the ground, or is it just the housekeepers that you basically have on the ground?
Good question. So it depends on how many properties we're operating in the same area. So if we have just one property, for example, that's very easy to do with just a one-on-one relationship with a housekeeper and a maintenance person. When we start getting to maybe 5, 6, 10 properties, there's a lot more going on there. Now, sometimes this could be that the housekeeper wants to step in and take on more responsibility. We've done that multiple times, where our housekeeper really becomes like our central point for management on the ground. But then other times it is very helpful to have someone sort of overlooking the operations there on the ground. So I guess long answer short, if the more properties you have, the more you might need a manager on top of your housekeeping and maintenance team.
Makes sense. Today we're talking with Tim Hubbard, and he is an expert in the area of short-term rentals. You can find him at www.midtownstays.com, and all that information, of course, will be in our show notes as well. Tim, so you're keeping track on this, and you're actually having virtual inspections after the housekeeper completes what they're doing. And I suppose that's done on a regular, consistent basis, or is it just kind of a spot check kind of thing, or do you do it every single time?
So the inspections, yeah, every time. So the property is always going to get cleaned the same way. And so as a housekeeper's arriving to a property and going through their normal checklist, that is essentially an inspection. But we do like to take it one step further. A lot of times, markets are seasonal. So in a slower time of the season, we'll want to do some deep cleans where we don't use that normal checklist, but we maybe have one that's twice as long, and it talks about removing the refrigerators and cleaning underneath and doing all those sort of detail-oriented things. And so that is actually one of the nice things about short-term rentals, Alan, that I discovered along the way. As I mentioned, I was started with long-term rentals, and sometimes we put a long-term tenant in our property and a year goes by and we show up to turn the property to get it ready for the next tenant, and it's a disaster, right? We have to paint the whole unit. Maybe they had dogs in there and we didn't know. That, believe it or not, doesn't actually happen that much with short-term rentals because we're in there so frequently. And so we don't have those huge costs for turnover. And we, of course, have ways to protect ourselves if there is some sort of damage. And that could be in the way of a deposit. It could be protection from the listing site itself, like Airbnb has some decent protection. It could be additional insurance that we purchase on behalf of the reservation for a minimal price. So I think I forgot the original question. I was just sort of trailing off there.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Inspections. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Enlightened investors, if you haven't done so already, be sure and click that like button and also click that share so others can take advantage of the content. And finally, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single one of our upcoming episodes. So, are you checking on the housekeeper after they complete their job, or are you trusting that they're doing the job, basically?
Well, the great thing about the software that we use is that we can see the moment they start the job. So when they show up there at the property, they They can clock into it. We pay all of our housekeepers by the turn, so not on an hourly basis. But depending on how it's set up, you could do it either way. We see when they start the job, and then we also see when they finish it. So the moment they finish it, we know the unit's clean. They could have left us any sort of comments in there, and that allows us to inform the next guest coming in, or at least just mark that unit as clean, available for rent again.
So the other question I have, you have all of these virtual tools and everything, but you have properties in 4 different countries, and we'd mentioned just briefly your issues with living in 2 different countries and 2 different languages.
Mhm.
So what about the software? Is it in different languages? How is the language barrier being handled?
Yeah, good question. So we're in Canada. Luckily, that's English speaking. So that one's pretty easy. And then the only properties we have currently in Brazil, where I am now, and Colombia are my own personal properties. So up until this year, I've actually had a separate property manager helping me out with this property down here in Brazil because it was a new market for me. So we'll be taking over management this year. I'm actually staying in the property right now. So that's one of the nice things about short-term rentals too. I mean, you can stay in them if it's a property that you enjoy staying in. And then in Colombia, we are building a development right now that's sizable enough to where we're going to have people on site. But to answer your question in regards to the software, we do have the capability now to easily translate messages directly through our property management software. And actually, most of the time, these listing sites like Airbnb will do that for you automatically. So let's say someone's coming from China and wants to stay in one of our properties in the United States. They might send a message in Chinese, but the way that you see that coming through has already been translated into English. So yeah, multiple kind of ways to get around the language barriers these days.
So we talked about managing the teams on the ground. How do you go about hiring teams on the ground when you're not there to do that?
Yeah, good question. So, for my personal portfolio, I have been there to do that. I've sort of built my personal properties in little hubs, I guess you could say. So I started investing in a market, and then I added more and more properties in that same market, which made that a lot easier to hire people directly. They have more incentive. There's more work going on there. But in terms of our management clients now, so we sort of have a non-traditional approach to our property management. Whereas a traditional property manager, you hand the keys over to, and you get a paycheck each month. Ours is a bit of a hybrid approach. So as we mentioned, we can do almost everything virtually. We can manage the guests, we can do the communication, we can coordinate the housekeeping, we can coordinate the maintenance, we can market the properties, price them, we can do all of that. But the challenging part is actually hiring people on the ground, which you've brought up. And so the way our company works now is with partners. We like to call partners because we're both sharing a little bit of responsibility. We work with partners or owners that maybe already have that connection set up, or maybe they're working with a property manager and they're paying 25%, but they have someone that could easily help them with their housekeeping. And so we're able to charge a discounted management fee. In exchange for that, just link up with the contacts that someone's already established in that market.
Well, that makes sense. Still challenges there, I would certainly think.
Mhm.
Well, you've got not just boots on the ground, but you have certainly a team, a virtual team. How do you
Mhm.
go about hiring your virtual teams, and how do you keep them incentivized and motivated?
Mhm. Yeah, good question. And something that I've been learning for years and years. So it's gotten a lot easier. The first time I hired someone virtually, I think was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And so we've changed a lot of things over the years. I think the first thing is always just having really good communication and expectations. And so we use Slack, as I mentioned before, for all of our internal communications between all of our team virtually. We have separate groups set up based on properties. But in terms of hiring, we do look for this is one of the other nice things about the growth and popularity, I guess you could say, in short-term rentals is that there are a lot more people working in the industry now. So in the past, where you maybe went to find a housekeeper, you maybe would have had a hard time finding someone that actually cleaned short-term rentals.
Mhm.
Finding someone that cleaned empty rentals, for example, was much more common. So we do have more options. There's also software tools available for finding housekeepers. So networks that have grown were a good place to find handymen and housekeepers. But the same is true for virtual help as well. So there's a lot of people that have already been doing this virtually. Like a couple of the latest people that joined our team worked for Airbnb out of a call center in Philippines for years. And so Airbnb is making some changes with their support using more AI and things like that. And so we were able to bring on a couple of really great people from the Philippines that had years of experience with Airbnb. So we, at the position we're at now, we do look for someone that already has experience dealing with guests, dealing with the different listing sites. We have an extensive training program. So our guest experience leader now, she does an excellent job at bringing people on. It does take quite a long time to train someone, but we have a lot of SOPs, policies and things that we follow. And I think at the end of it, though, it's just good expectations, good communication. And I like to think we have a pretty good virtual culture. We try to keep it fun. So,
Well, how do you analyze a property when you're considering acquisition?
yeah, good question. Really important one. So again, luckily we have much more tools than we did in the past. Now we have some companies that have popped up that just do data analytics with short-term rentals. And so they do what we call scraping data. They can go out on Airbnb and they can scrape all the data in a specific market based on zip code to see how many units are available there, what they're charging, and then also how occupied they've been. And so there's some really good data sources now. That's sort of the first place, is just deciding if you've got your eyes on a market and you're thinking about getting a short-term rental, the next step would be to use or purchase one of these data reports. So you can go to airdna.co, or Price Labs is another one that has some really good data. And you can look at historic data. So we know that historic performance doesn't guarantee future performance, right? But it does give us a pretty good idea of what's going on there. And we can also see, you mentioned Airbnb bust, I think, at the very beginning. There's a lot of, I guess there's a lot of clickbait, but it is true in some markets. So some markets that got really saturated and had a lot of additional supply, it's more challenging there. But that's one of the things that we can see with this data. We can see how many new units came onto the market within a certain period of time. And then we can also see what the average daily rates are. And so if you've got your eyes on a market, and you go back and you look over the last year's data and you see, okay, 5,000 new properties got added here. And as a result, the average daily rate has dropped 50% and the occupancy's dropped 50%. Well, then obviously that's a market you probably want to be pretty careful with. So we have these data tools available. We're really fortunate now to be using one that's available for property managers, where we have direct data. It's called Key Data, and it's got property managers around the US that are actually feeding their data into this source. So we can see both direct data coming from other property management companies on top of this data that's sort of scraped. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. But basically, the more data we have, the better decision we can make with the properties.
So yeah, I mean, I guess your final decision would certainly be on the data. Are there any, I don't know, emotional, good feeling kinds of things that would lead one to any particular market as opposed to others?
Well, I think so. Short-term rentals are a little different, right? Sometimes people invest in one because they want to use it personally. And then sometimes people invest in short-term rentals because they want to get the maximum return possible. And so I think that's the first question is this a property that I'm going to personally be staying at? If not, then if it's 100% investment decision, we can just use those numbers. It should all basically be based off numbers. But There's another piece that's a little more challenging with short-term rentals where they're unlike hotels. Maybe you have a hotel that has 200 rooms in it. Those hotel rooms are all the same pretty much. Maybe they have a couple suites there, maybe they have a couple, that are a little larger, but a short-term rental, you might have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath next to a 3-bedroom, 2-bath that are vastly different. Maybe one of them has a backyard barbecue, pool, resort sort of feel, or it has, and so we do need to look at the amenities that are being offered on certain properties. I guess what I like to do, or there's so much data we could look at, but not to get lost in all of it. If you've got your eyes on a market, what you might want to do is go in and just find the top performing properties in that market and see what they have in common. So do they all have jacuzzis? Do they all have views of the ocean? Are they all, 100 yards from the local center of town? And so we can see their revenue, we can see those properties, they're live online, and really find out what they're doing. And then from there, you can see how much that type of property would cost. And if the cost for that type of property doesn't make sense, then you can sort of scratch that area off and you can look for another market.
Well, is now a good time to get into short-term rentals?
It's definitely more challenging right now. But again, it depends on our individual positions, right? So I still think real estate is a really good investment. It has some of the best tax benefits out there. Obviously, interest rates have doubled, over the last year or two. And so it's more expensive to buy a property with debt. And I've always followed the Robert Kiyosaki cash flow. If it doesn't cash flow, then it's not a good investment. It's not one that I would want to do. And so because of that, it has gotten more difficult. But we have lots of people that maybe have a lot of cash and they just want to put it to use. And so in that case, I still think short-term rentals can be a really good investment. And we also have the other end of this where we sort of flipped and it is a buyer's market now. Properties are sitting on the market longer. They're coming down in prices in quite a few places across the market. And so if you have the capital right now, I think you can definitely negotiate more. And so I think it really depends on your unique situation. I haven't personally bought anything in the US in almost 2 years now. So we have been working on this project in Colombia, but I'm sort of gearing up. I was actually in the US earlier this year at the beginning, going around some markets looking for properties. And so I'm excited to get back in, but it's been a little more challenging the last year or so.
Yeah, inflation has certainly reduced purchasing opportunities, and along with interest rates, it certainly is a challenging environment to find those cash flowing properties. Tim, let's close this out with just this one last question. What is the major drawback to short-term rentals?
Major drawback. Well, unfortunately, because short-term rentals grew in popularity so much, I think that a lot of people got into properties without maybe running all of the numbers and understanding exactly what's happening in that market, like we should do with any real estate investment, no matter whether it's a short-term rental or not. And those properties are going to be hard to get out of. We have less people that can purchase them now. So I think that's the sad truth, that there have been some markets that have gotten overly supplied, and that's put a lot of pressure on some people. And then one other big drawback, but that it is avoidable, is that we can have rules change in the cities where we operate short-term rentals. And so that's another thing, again, that we can do before we purchase the property, is ensure that we can actually do it there legally. But if you're already operating a short-term rental in an area that doesn't have any rules set up, that is a major drawback. It's possible that at some point in time, the laws for that county or city or state can change, preventing you from operating that as a short-term rental. And if that was your initial investment approach, strictly short-term rental, and there's no fallback to long-term rental, then you could find yourself in a challenging spot too.
Oh. Good thoughts on that. Tim, thank you so much for being with us. Very informative, enlightening conversation. Enlightened investors, thank you so much for being with us today. I know you got a whole lot out of today's show, and so please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe, and head over to your favorite podcast app and leave us a rating and a review. Until next time, live abundantly in all areas of life, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, Alan.
Enlightened investors, wait, don't go just yet. I just want to remind you about our recently launched webinar that you will not want to miss. If you're at all curious and would like to learn more about how real estate investing can diversify your investment portfolio, alleviate the anxiety associated with Wall Street swings, leverage your 401ks and IRAs to substantially increase the return on your investment, and do all of this with turnkey, hands-off, passive real estate investments, then you'll want to immediately go to stevetalker.com/webinar. In the webinar, we'll also address the common dubious investment schemes that you want to avoid. To access the webinar, go to stevetalker.com/webinar. I look forward to seeing you in the webinar.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Estate Investing Abundance, brought to you by Steve Talker Capital, a company working for passionate professionals like you to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steve Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine. These endeavors attempt to enhance the human treatment of horses worldwide. Steve Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures, great and small, flourish abundantly. For resources to develop your financial independence, connect with us at stevetalker.com.